All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming along to policies and procedures in tuck shops today. I do have a chat. Oh, Janelle, that's fine. No camera or mic, no dramas. But just put stuff in the chat if you need to talk to us. That's more than okay. But yeah, policies and procedures in tuck shops. But first things first, I would like to do an acknowledgement of country. So Quast acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands from across Queensland. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across the state. Now, for those who don't know me, my name is Donna. I am the project manager here, actually, of Healthier Tuck Shops. These are my contact details. I have copied this slide to the end as well, so you can write them down at the end. I'm a nutritionist by background. I've had a few years' experience working in stakeholder engagement and health promotion. I've been involved in my local P&C, my local school and other tuck shops around the area for many, many years. And I've been new to this role in December last year, so I already feel like an old hand, but every day I learn something new. So that's exciting. Now, normally we would do introductions, but what I'm going to do this time is I just like to use this slide to remind everybody to put their school into their name as well. And if there is something that you like about where you work, I'll be talking to you about that in the context of policies and procedures today. And I'll be talking to you about that throughout today. So I will be drawing questions from each of you at some point in time. So we'll get through that. But if there is anything anyone would like to say before we start, now is the time. If there's anything you specifically would like to know about, please let me know and I'll make a little bit of a note here and make sure we talk about it today.
I'd love to know if there's templates that we can whack straight into our tuck shop businesses to make life easier for volunteers.
Well, the short answer to that is yes, Alicia. We do have a number of templates. Some you can whack straight in, some you just need to do a minor adjustment to, but we provide them to you in a Word document, so it's easy for you to amend and personalise as required. But yes, not for everything, but for some things, yes, we do.
Okay.
Is there a particular policy people would like to know about today?
I would just like to know what main policies you need to in place. What's the ones that you absolutely have to have?
Yep. Okay. Well, you've come to the right place, Kim. We actually, as part of this network meeting, we developed a list. So at the end of this network meeting, I'll send around, we'll talk about it during the next hour, but I'll send you a list at the end of all of what we say are must-have policies and what are the nice-to-have policies. And yeah, so that should help, hopefully, and give you just some direction on where to go and not to worry about doing everything, but just prioritising. Anybody else with regards to any specific policies? No? All right, well, we might get going. So, before we start, I should mention Tuck Shop Conversations. I don't know if anyone has logged in to Facebook and has joined the group. If you have, actually, I do think some of you have because I recognise your names. Please do log on because this group is really all about conveners getting together to share their information and their knowledge with each other. It's not really about us as Quast. We just go in there to moderate it and we act as like conversation starters, essentially. So we'll pose a question to the group and then it's really up to you guys to sort of share your ideas. So next week, we're actually going to be doing a little bit on policies and procedures. So anything that you learned from today, if you've still got further questions, it's a really good idea to pose those questions in the group and just see what comes back and see what other people are doing around Queensland. And that's going for the rest of term 2. And then, because it's sort of a program over 12 weeks, and then the group will kick up again in term 4 as well. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. We sort of try to make it nice and fun and positive and engaging for everybody. So yeah, log on to that when you can. But policies and procedures, that's what we're here for today. So why are policies and procedures important? So the first thing first with tuck shops is to remember it is a non-regulated environment at the moment, and that's from a Food Act, I guess, point of view. So we don't necessarily have any food safety policies or procedures that we must follow, But what we do at Quast is food hygiene is obviously very important, because it's important that we talk about this a lot in our food safety supervisor course, but it's really important, obviously, for obvious reasons, that if we're going to be making food and preparing food and serving it to children, we need to do that in a really healthy, hygienic way. So from that point of view, from a non-regulated environment, we're different to cafes and restaurants where we don't necessarily need to comply with the big book of food safety, the Food Safety Act. So there's like quite often you see restaurants will have big food policies and procedures. We definitely don't expect tuck shops to be anywhere near that concise, but what we do is provide you with the necessary ones around how to work in a tuck shop, how to clean surfaces. So just the basics, so we can make sure that we're providing a safe environment to prepare food as possible. Now, policies, for this reason, this is why we have policies in tuck shop, because you're not regulated. So it's important to set out the policy specific to your tuck shop. And that's why we do have some templates on our website, because we're sort of all about best practice. And policies set out the why we want to do something. So it's your position on a certain area, and procedures really explain the how you're going to go about doing it. Policies and procedures in tuck shops. In our experience, policies and procedures have been essential for taking the personal out of decisions. So I don't know if you've ever had to have a discussion with your P&C or if the school's ever had a discussion with the tuck shop convener, and there's nothing to back up the why things need to be done in a certain way, or why why we have this position that we have. And this is why policies and procedures are really important, because in the absence of a policy, it quite often just gets viewed as your opinion, and that really doesn't do it justice. And so by cementing it in a policy, which is as simple as writing it down on a piece of paper and getting everybody to agree to it, then at least then everyone's got one point of reference for that. And so I know that sounds a bit obtuse when we start talking in that context, but it is simple things like operating hours of the tuck shop. You just need a policy on that, like what days are you operating and why are you operating on 2 days? And then if you ever get to the point, I know there's some tuck shops out there that are kind of sitting in between, do we open for 2 days and then we should be opening for a third day now? And so by having a policy around when you would open for a third day, it really helps to go, right, well, these are our measurements that we need to be against. So, you know, perhaps it might be when we get to 350 students, we'll open for 3 days. It might be perhaps when we're getting to more than 250 orders a day, let's open it for a third day so that we can try and take the pressure off the tuck shop conveners to get so many orders out in 1 day, and we can spread it across 2 days. So having a policy around that would really help, and it's less about opinion and then it's more about fact, and everyone can refer to it. It does cover you when things go wrong. So making sure that when volunteers sign in to the tuck shop and you have a policy around how, or a procedure on how they should be in the tuck shop, like a dress code is a policy, for example, making sure that they're wearing enclosed shoes and they're wearing an apron and they've got their hair back and they don't have long spiky nails. You know, if something was to happen to them and something was to drop on their foot and they weren't wearing the right shoes and you didn't have them sign off on the policy, then that creates all sort of dramas around, well, compensation and injuries and who's going to pay for any, you know, if there's a serious injury, if they haven't signed something, then you might be liable, and like it's all these things. So policies are just there to protect you. I think also in my experience with policies and particularly procedures, they tell you how the tuck shop operates. I go into lots of different tuck shops and every tuck shop is different. No one, like you all have a similar flow throughout the day, but how you go about doing it is really unique to each tuck shop. And so being able to outline that in a procedure is really important, because as someone who would come into a tuck shop and not know how you go about doing things, if I can read your operation manual or just your procedures, that gives me a really good idea on what you're doing. And it makes it, particularly for volunteers, it really helps them to just be able to start doing things the way that they're meant to be done. Like it might be as simple as making a cheese sandwich, for example. Like, you know, the procedure could be as detailed as 1 slice of cheese, buttered both sides, make sure it's wholemeal bread, and make sure that you cut it in a triangle and not a rectangle, because, you know, different tuck shops do different things. You might have packaging that only fits triangle cut sandwiches, not rectangle. But if the volunteer comes in and cuts them all rectangles, then you can't put it in the packaging. So simple procedures like that are really helpful to help guide how the tuck shop operates. Again, it's that consistency. So if we're thinking about how we prepare meals, and this is like getting down, I guess, to food menus and procedures around those, outlining how the food is prepared means it's less reliant on the same person doing it every single time. And procedures that are written out that are clear then allow it so that when, you know, someone else comes in to do the sandwich, they will cut it into the triangle because that's what it says on the piece of paper. And like I said, you know, change of staff, all those sort of things. So in terms of a policy, so there's a hierarchy. When we talk about if you Google it, like they'll go into lots of things, but essentially there's a policy, there's a process, and then the procedure. Essentially, that's like a hierarchy if we were to do it in a triangle. So a policy sort of sits right at the very top. And this is the definition. It's a bit boring, but it kind of sets out the rules of a specific topic. And then the purpose of the policy is to establish protections against incidents that would disrupt an organisation's dynamic or workflow, as well as the individual lives of employees. So that's all, I mean, that's a bit of guff, but it is all about setting up that framework that creates a safe environment for you guys as tuck shop conveners to operate in. And if there's anyone from schools here, it also provides you guidance on how to establish a tuck shop and how to set the framework for when you are recruiting conveners, to give them guidance on how you would like the tuck shop to be run. In terms of a procedure, so procedures are sort of like a step down. So I've got some examples here where we have procedures, and these are quite visual examples. And in tuck shops, we use a lot of visual cues for our procedures. So hand washing tips, a recipe card, even up to the washing up. So making sure that people are washing up things properly in your tuck shop, if you don't have a commercial dishwasher, are really important to make sure, one, that the water is hot enough, two, that they're washing it in the right way, three, that they're rinsing it correctly, and four, the drying policy, because free to air drying is preferred to washing up with tea towels. But if you are going to wash up with tea towels, or dry with tea towels, I should say, there's at what point do you change over the tea towels? And at what point do you have a specific tea towel for a specific item? So all those type of things will help. So having procedures that outline that, and it's a step-by-step thing, really. An example, I don't know if you guys have a forgotten lunch policy, but this is what, it's a good example that we see in some schools. And this is because obviously tuck shops, we're in the business of selling food, but we're not in the business of children going hungry. And so this is a nice in-between policy that we think all schools and tuck shops really need to consider. And it's where if someone has forgotten their food, or if there's a late order that comes in, how the tuck shop deals with that. I was at a tuck shop last week out in Kingaroy, actually, and I was there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and between the hours of about 8 and 9:30, there were 7 orders that came through for a late order. And it just was really disruptive to the day, and there didn't seem to be a flow to how it was all happening. And they acknowledged that at the end, like both the school and the tuck shop. So we don't really have a policy, we just sort of go with the flow of it all. So when I spoke to them about this policy, they were like, oh, this makes so much sense. It's in writing. It's really clear what's expected of us. So examples of that would be, so a policy, so this is, and these, I'm going to show you 2 different policy examples of a forgotten lunch policy. So example 1 is, the tuck shop is now offering a lunch option for children who have no lunch at school. Example 2 was, students who forget their lunch may get an emergency lunch from the tuck shop. And these are real examples from real schools in Queensland that I've just pulled off their websites. And some have been more detailed than others, but that's absolutely fine because every school is different and unique. So example number 1. So a tuck shop is now offering a lunch option for children who have no lunch at school. So that was their policy. And then they had 3 procedures that sat underneath that. So the first one was, when a parent has forgotten to order a lunch forgotten to order a lunch, the procedure was this. And so it was simply that they had to pay a cost of $8.50 and they didn't get a choice. That was the set fee. And then the other option would be, that they could, if they didn't want to do the $8.50, they could do a $3.50 option, which was cheese, crackers, and an apple. And that was it. They didn't get to choose the food item that went into that. That was all that was that was all that was offered. Alternatively, the parent then had the option of bringing lunch into the school if they didn't want to pay the money. But it was very clear that the food is not being offered for free to the child. And then they had obviously different procedures for when things happened at different times of the day. So this is between first break and second break. So if someone presented at first break to say, I don't have any food, this is, again, it was very similar to the first option that was presented. So they call the parent, they go to the office, they call the parent, they get charged $8.50 for a meal, and whatever the meal was that it was available. So it doesn't mean that they get to choose the meal. It just means that the meal would be provided, whatever the cafe could prepare. And then the $3.50 was the cheese, crackers, and an apple. Alternatively, if someone brings lunch to the school. And then they had a third procedure, which was when the student presents to the student office after 1:20. So this is obviously after second break, and it was simply the cheese, crackers, and an apple would be offered at $3.50. So that was their example of a forgotten lunch policy and 3 really simple procedures that they've documented. So this is all pulled, this is online, and it's all pulled from their website and they had this promoted to parents, to the PNF and to the school community in general about this is, if you've forgotten your lunch, this is what you need to do. Now, the second example of a forgotten lunch policy is students who forget their lunch may get an emergency lunch from the tuck shop. So they treated food in terms of forgotten lunches as an emergency need, which is a little bit different to the first example. So, and this was their entire policy and procedures. It was on their website, easy for parents to see, and it was promoted in their tuck shop as well. But this is all they had. So their policy was the first bit, which was students who forgot their lunch may get an emergency lunch from the canteen. That was the policy. The process was they need to be authorised by the teacher or the year patron. Students will be given a choice of Vegemite, ham, cheese sandwich, or a piece of fruit at cost of $6. And then an email will be sent to parents to notify you and advise of payment due. So this is different to the first one where parents didn't get an option to pay it or not pay it. So can you see the difference of the procedure? And then an email will be sent to parents. Preferred payment option is IOU payment via Flexi Schools, but the canteen will also accept cash payment. So that was a different procedure in how they managed that these children would get food. So you really need to think about when you're developing your procedures, how you want it to play out in your school environment. Is it a school where you can actually do this, where you don't need the parents' permission to put an IOU onto Flexi Schools, or is it where you operate in a school where you need to seek out approval from the parents first to figure out what the best option is for the child that they would like to do? And then on the second procedure was, if you need to pay an IOU, they showed you how to do it on Flexi Schools. So they were basically saying, if your child turns up to school with no lunch, that's fine, we'll feed them, but then we're charging you. And that's pretty much their policy and their procedures.
Sorry, Donna.
Yeah.
Did you say that you would put that policy on, say your Tuckshop Facebook page or on the school website?
No, that's what I pulled from their school website. But we do have that. If I go back,
like, would I load my policy onto the school website to make it publicly known? Yes,
you could absolutely do that. If it's been approved by everybody and you've got the approval, you could just make it a paragraph. Yeah. So yeah. So this is, this is our example, and you can absolutely put that into a website. Like, it doesn't get any more complicated than that, to be fair.
Cool.
But yeah, it's a policy that we quite often think about, and a lot of it's already happening in place. I think that's the other thing I want to stress with policies and procedures, is that a lot of these are already in place. You just haven't written them. They may not be written down. And it's just about documenting it so that if there's a change of responsibility or a staff member, that consistency is still there. So it's less dependent on the staff if it is written down. But yeah, good question though. You can absolutely put that on your policy website. I've also seen it in newsletters. I've also seen it campaigned out the front of tuck shops where they've had a lot of requests. This school had a lot of requests for children expecting to be fed because they said their parents forgot to feed them. And so what they would do is they would put the policy up out the front of the tuck shop to let them know that if they had forgotten their lunch, they weren't to come to the tuck shop first. They had to go to the school office for the school office to deal with them, because the tuck shop doesn't have time to deal with individuals coming up saying, I've forgotten my lunch, and then take them offline for 10 minutes, unless it's a request that comes directly from the office. So, yeah, and just making it a bit more difficult for parents, I think, as well, to become lazy and just go, oh, it's all right, the tuck shop will pay for it. Like, that's not what we don't want parents to be like that. We want them to appreciate and value the services of a tuck shop and not take it for granted. So the next one I wanted to talk about was excessive heat policy. So I did want to do a quick show of hands. Who in this group today has an excessive heat policy at the tuck shop? Does anybody have one? So if you don't have one, I just wanted to talk about the importance of considering putting one in place. And the reason why we do that is because recently we've had a lot of heat waves in Queensland, and they seem to be happening a lot more common than what they used to. And we had a case back in February where there was that heat wave and there was no aircon in the tuck shop, and the tuck shop wanted to close down for the day, but the school principal said no. And the school principal said no for several reasons. One, they said, well, if you close down, it means there'll be hundreds of kids that won't get food today because it's too late to, like, the parents have already sent their kids to school, or they're on their way to sending them to school. And number two, they were of the opinion that it wasn't like the working conditions weren't that bad. And it's really interesting because as a result of, and we'd sort of been aware of this, but this call really highlighted that we need to start promoting that thinking about your workplace and making it safe for you guys to work is really important. And in Queensland, they don't necessarily have excessive heat policies for schools. They do have excessive heat guidelines. So they provide parameters on when strenuous and really physical activities should be conducted and when they shouldn't be conducted, and what temperatures you need to be considerate of. And I just wanted to say, just, you don't have to respond to this, but have a think about how does your school respond to when temperatures in the tuck shop, or even external to the tuck shop, reach 30 degrees, 36 degrees, or even in some cases 40 degrees. So outside the tuck shop and then inside the tuck shop. So do you have a policy that if it got to 30 degrees in the tuck shop and it was like 60% humidity, do you keep working or do you stop? Or like, because I've been in many tuck shops where there's no aircon and we're sweating away in there at 36 degrees and it is not pleasant. And you just wonder about the hygiene of the food. You wonder about yourselves because you're sweating so much, you're constantly washing your hands. So the sanitization of the whole space is really, you've got to really consider all of that. If you're going to keep working in 36 degrees, then you might need to change up your sanitization processes and hygienic processes for the tuck shop. What we recommend, and this is an example of what the government has. So this is the guidelines, and they talk about all this sort of stuff. But in the end, what you need to do is, if you are looking at excessive heat and wondering if it's an appropriate space for you to be working in, it's about sitting down with whoever the decision makers are. So if it's the P&C or if it's the school, and saying, right, these are the workplace conditions. So the other thing is, in the heat that we don't often factor in is now I've forgotten the word, is the exhaust. So getting rid of all, like making sure we're removing the heat from the kitchen is as important as whether we have an exhaust fan or not. So a lot of tuck shops I know have exhausts that recycle the air back into the tuck shop from the oven. So in a situation like this where they don't have air conditioning, they are really hot. Like they're probably hotter than the outside environment in that case. So it's about sitting down and saying, well, this is what, in the case of a heat wave, if the Queensland government advises there's a heat wave on Friday, perhaps could we have like 48 hours notice to send to the school community? Please be aware that there's a heat wave on Friday. The tuck shop will be operating on minimal meals. There'll be no hot food served. We'll only be doing sandwiches, and you can adjust your online ordering for that. Or if you're at a secondary school, then you just change what's available through for service, just to make sure you're not overheating yourself within the day itself. But I guess the key is with excessive heat is being proactive with it rather than reactive. It's much easier to say tuck shop isn't operating on Friday on Wednesday than it is Friday morning. So, and these are just 2 examples. So, and I've just put them up front because as you can see, the policies and procedures are developed differently. So obviously the forgotten lunch policy, the policy itself was quite similar, but the procedures were quite different underneath. And these Queensland government guidelines, so there will be lots of guidelines that you can base your policy off if you want to. So you could refer to this in a policy and saying we're basing it off this and pull specific areas out of it. In terms of developing policies and procedures, we definitely have made it simple for you guys in terms of what's on our website. We've got a policies and procedures page, so please do go and have a look at that. We're going to get into what we recommend and why in a second. But definitely across the 5 groups, it's financial, operational, workplace health, risk and assessment, stock taking, you know, how you manage your food that's coming in, food handling and hygiene. And these are a mixture of member-only resources and non-member resources. So we've tried to make them as much as possible available to everybody, but because we do offer some through training only, we've locked them into member-only resources. But please have a look. And if you've got any questions, just send us an email. Now, in terms of policies and procedures and how you develop them, something that you need to also consider. So we'll get into the development in a little sec, but I want to talk about distribution and record keeping. So it's great to have a policy, but if you're not going to talk about it and communicate it, it might as well just sit in the folder, whether it's in a hard copy or electronic. So the big thing about policies and procedures is you need to share it and share it wide so that everybody knows that that's the policy, particularly when it comes to Tuckshop and it affects community. So when you make a decision in the Tuckshop and it's going to affect the community, making sure that they're aware of that decision and that change decision. They don't have to like it, but as long as they're aware of it, like that's what's important. So, and there's several different ways that you can do it. You must keep copies. I would keep several copies, but use one as the master. And then, so if you want to print one out, put it in a folder, but maybe update the one that's in the electronic file. And then every time you update that, reprint it and put it out as a hand, or get the P&C to take care of it, or get the school to keep a copy of it, whatever works, but make sure you've got copies of it so that you can go back to find it when you need to, particularly if you don't have it up on the wall. In terms of developing a policy, so this is what we recommend you do first and foremost, and it's 3 steps really. The first one is start identifying what you have in terms of policies and procedures. So if you have none, then that's a really good place to start. It's quite easy. You have none. And then identify what you need. So if you have no policies written down, I recommend that the very next step is that you need to start writing them down. That would be step number 2. And if you don't know how to write policies, ask for some help. Like see if there is a parent at the school that would be keen to support, like even if it's just you dictating it to them and they type it into a Word document. It doesn't need to be complicated. That's the next thing, is don't overcomplicate the policies. When we say a policy, we don't mean that it needs to be 6 pages long and needs to have war and peace introduced into it. We just need a really clear policy position, like with the forgotten lunches, 1 line. That was their policy. It was 1 sentence. Keep the language really simple so that anybody who reads it can understand it. And then obviously, as we said, it's sharing. So communicate through major communication channels when you're doing it. So do we have any questions? Are there any policies that you've got in mind when I'm talking about these steps that you wanted to have a quick chat about? In terms of how this process might work, or it might complicate things. Oh, no, we can still see me. Something's going on my computer. One at the moment. There we go. That's better. Okay. So does that make sense in terms of not overcomplicating the policies when you're writing them? Even if it's just a 1-liner and saying we need to develop a policy about opening hours, and you just say, well, you start with saying the very basic is our opening hours are blah, and then you start with the why. So this is our policy position. And then you're saying, well, why? Why are they open from 9 to 3? Or why are they open from 8 to 2? Or why are we only doing a half day? And it's just writing the why underneath it. And then the next bit is then doing the procedures. So the procedures for opening would be, okay, so the procedure for opening the tuck shop is that the tuck shop convener may or may not have a key. So if the tuck shop convener doesn't have a key, then the procedure would be that the cleaners would open up the tuck shop before they arrive, or that the school principal opens it up before they get there. And then the key is then handed back to the office at the end of day, or, you know, whatever the procedure is, you just got to write it down. It doesn't need to be complicated. It just steps so it's really clear, and you assume that someone who's going to read that has no understanding of the policy that you're writing. So in terms of what we recommend for policies, and don't you need to stress, I have all of this, you'll get this in an email afterwards. We definitely recommend a must-have, and the way that you define between a must-have and a nice-to-have is that must-haves are the ones that set out your day-to-day. They are the ones that they are all the processes that you're already doing throughout the day documented, essentially. So making a sandwich is a process, but how you make that sandwich is the procedure. How you engage with the school community. So, for example, do you cater for sporting events? Is there a policy around that? Or is that something that you decide, or does it get approved through the school, or does the school request it from you? Like, how does that come about if you ever get asked to do catering? What's the process of approving whether you can do it or not? Establishing working relationships and decision-making processes. This is really important for tuck shops that have a P&C as their employer. Making sure, particularly with the high rate of handover in P&C executives, having existing policies and procedures really help you to then, when you get a new P&C president come in and they want to know all about the tuck shop, you can just hand them the policies and procedures and go, well, this is what we do and this is how we do it. Rather than having to explain yourself and then feel like you have to justify why everything is how it is, you can just say, well, this is how we do it. And then and that helps them to become informed. And it means that it does definitely stop all that reactive engagement that you quite often get from P&C executives that are coming in with really, obviously they're curious and they want to know about the tuck shop and they've got every right to understand what's happening in the tuck shop, but it helps you control how that information is given to them. And they don't come in at 10 o'clock right before service when you're really, really busy. You can make sure that they've read the policies and procedures and set up a meeting with them to talk about any issues that they might have, rather than them coming in and disrupting your day with their questions. And then the nice to have stuff is the value add. So, and that can really be dependent on the school, the community, the children that are in attendance. So for example, what's a good example? I wrote a list earlier and now I've misplaced it, but essentially value adds would include Mother's Day. Like, do you do a special Mother's Day? Like, what's your policy for having people donate goods into the tuck shop? That would be a lovely must-have these days if we could require the community to donate into our tuck shops. But a nice to have me, well, what's the policy? Like, how do you get the community to donate goods? And what goods do you want? And how do you cut it off when you've got too many? Like, can you give it back to them? Or do you just say, look, you know, donations can be delivered on a Tuesday. You obviously don't want it in on a Friday when you're really, really busy, but is it all right to get the donations delivered on a Monday and Tuesday so you can go through them? And the things that you don't need to reference every day. So it's that once in a month, like stock taking, for example, it's definitely a must-have because you need to know what your stock taking procedures are. But in terms of the value adding of your stock taking, a good policy around stock taking that's as a nice to have is maybe looking at suppliers and how you renegotiate with suppliers. You don't do that every day, but you might be wanting to do that down the track. So that might be a nice to have later on if you have a policy with that, particularly if you've got to work with the school and the P&C, understanding how that triangle works to change suppliers. If that's written down, then that's really, really important. So these are our must-have policies that we recommend for tuck shops. Operationally, menu procedures and manuals. And I will send this through in a list afterwards. It's actually also available online on our website too. Workstation procedures. So that's like the job station tasks. So making sure people know what they're doing in the spaces that they're doing. Food ordering policy, when you order food, how do you order the food? That's really important. We sort of look at these policies like, if you're sick as a tuck shop convener and someone came in on a Monday to do your job because you're sick, would they know what to do? So, and if the answer is no, then you probably need to look at putting some of these procedures in place. And again, it doesn't need to be exhaustive. It can just be a one-pager of this is what we do on a Monday. A stock take policy procedure. So the bare bones of when you do the stock take, how often you do the stock take, and who is there to help you to do the stock take. So do you need the P&C to help you out? Do you need it to be volunteers, or can you do it on your own? Definitely recommend forgotten lunch policy. It just helps with that clarity between your engagement with the school office, yourselves, and the school community. Financial policies, definitely understanding how to make money and how to lose money in a tuck shop is really important. And knowing how your profit and losses are calculated within your school. It might not be something that you can document, but at least having an understanding of the policy. So a good policy around tuck shop would be, is there an expectation that this policy, that this tuck shop needs to make a 30% profit over the next 12 months? I mean, that's a policy position. And then, you know, the justification of why why that policy position exists would be something that you would expect to see. Or maybe it's like the policy for this tuck shop is that it's a community service. So while profit is important, it's not our primary goal. And our primary goal or aim is to deliver a community service where we're delivering nutritious meals to our children 3 days a week across two breaks. And then you might have a policy that says a small profit would be amazing, or something like that. Menu planning and pricing, obviously that all links into profit and loss. So knowing how much you're making and when you're making it, having procedures in place on how you check that, particularly with all the changing prices at the moment, that's really something to consider. And we do offer training in that one. So if you, we have some spreadsheets that are pre-populated with some formulas that make that job quite simple for you. Obviously, smart choices is still compulsory across all schools. So knowing where your menu sits across that, or at least having a copy of smart choices is probably a good thing to have in your school. Policies and procedures for our workplace health and safety. So obviously being safe in our workplace is as important as preparing nutritious or meals for the children. So making sure a food safety plan exists, and we have got copies of what that might look like for a tuck shop on our website. Definitely temperature control, cleaning and sanitizing, incoming goods checking procedure, making sure that the food is arriving of good quality and of the right temperature. Equipment maintenance procedures, definitely making sure of keeping a log of when you bought the equipment. And you may not have this, the school might keep this because they might see it as a school asset, and that's totally fine. But it's about logging when the equipment was purchased, when it was installed. Did you get all of your electrical equipment? You know, sometimes they recommend that before winter, if you haven't turned it on for 12 months, that it needs to get checked off by an electrician. Definitely personal hygiene policies and procedures. So that's as simple as, what's your washing hands policy? What's your cleaning the benches policy? How do you, it comes back to that dress code policy. And volunteering in a tuck shop, knowing what you want your volunteers to do on their first day is really important. So having an orientation checklist is really important to do, so that if you do have volunteers, that it's really clear what's expected of them. And it also helps that when, just say perhaps they stopped wearing enclosed shoes and wanted to wear sandals, you could refer them back to the policy and say, well, look, you did sign that off on your first day. So please, if you can, wear enclosed shoes, otherwise you won't be allowed to return back to the tuck shop. Any questions on that list before we move on? No? Have I? Oh, there's something in the chat. Sorry if I've forgotten you. I don't know what the yes, thank you was, Bridget. I'm sorry. Maybe just send me a message afterwards, or explain what the yes, thank you was too. Food safety in tuck shops. So we just talk about this because whilst it's not a requirement for tuck shops to have a food safety supervisor in there every day, it is best practice to have someone who is aware of food safety guidelines in your tuck shop. So how to handle food safely and prepare food safely is at the core of having a tuck shop that operates well and safely for our children and for ourselves. So there's loads of stuff on the Queensland government that you can read, but we actually have an accredited course that we've designed specifically for tuck shop conveners, because it is important that we all know how to work in a kitchen safely. But also we've got a free online safe food handlers course for staff and volunteers. And that just gives them the bare basics of what they need to be doing when they're in a tuck shop and how they need to be working in a tuck shop, because it is a little bit different to working from home in our home kitchens, particularly when we're dealing with commercial equipment. It's just a little bit different. Again, we've got loads of policies and templates. Queensland government have got some really good guidelines around food safety, but it's not particular to tuck shops. And we've found that it's too much. Like, where is a copy of it? I can't get to it, but it's like this thick, and that's way too much for a tuck shop. Like, that's way too much. So, I mean, I think if you printed out all of our templates front to back, it's like it doesn't even fill a folder this big, our policies and procedures, but we feel like that gives you everything that you need to be able to do your job effectively and for that tuck shop to be operating successfully. The nice to have ones. So a volunteer, so these are like volunteering in the tuck shop policy. So a sign up form, like you don't have to have a sign up form. You can get them to check it off in the orientation, but if you wanted to, you could do that. You could get a sign-in sheet. We quite often know that volunteers just sort of walk in and walk out. And quite often now on school sites, they have to sign in at the front desk before they can even come to the tuck shop. So now, maybe 5 years ago, we would have said it was a must-have, but because schools are picking up on that signing in and signing out, it's more of a nice to have if you want to keep a record of volunteers working every day. Also a volunteer timetable. If you've got loads of volunteers, having a timetable and sharing that with everybody is a really good way to communicate out how all your volunteers are working. Healthy food policy for sport and school events. So if you are at a school and they do like the tuck shop to cater for sporting events, having a policy around what sort of food you'll supply, because obviously it won't be the full tuck shop menu, but it might be an abbreviated version of that menu, or you might just focus on food that's really high in protein for the day and snacks that are really high in energy and protein as well. Other policies, sustainable tuck shop policies. So if you are really passionate about the environment and waste management, definitely have a look at developing a tuck shop policy around sustainability, a communication policy, like how you communicate to people. I know that sounds really silly to have to write it down, but simple things like, particularly with P&Cs and schools, understanding that saying like, so decisions need to be made in a meeting, not on the fly when I'm doing 6 things at once in the tuck shop. So just writing it down, excuse me, is really important. And it just helps with that communication and reduces any confusion people might have. Performance reviews. We do have some tuck shops that do performance reviews, so for your staff and yourself, but just making sure you've got a policy around when they occur and what are the benchmarks that people will be measured against for their performance are really important in a policy, because maybe it's not necessarily, you might measure their performance on the results from a school survey and how popular the tuck shop was, or you might measure results on how effective they were in delivering meals, or so understanding how performance happens for you guys is really important. So if that is happening to you and you don't have a policy, definitely put a policy in place around your performance reviews if that's happening. But like I said at the beginning, I know this is a lot. This list was, I know that was like 25 policies, but you're probably already doing them. I would say 95% of what I've listed today, you're already doing it. So it's just about putting pen to paper, and it's absolutely fine to start off with writing it down first. That's how I always start my policies when I write them, because it helps me get my ideas on paper. And then, typing it up later is nice, but getting it on paper, just writing it down so it's somewhere, or even if it's in an email to the P&C or to the school principal, really important that you sort of write it down, get it documented, and then it's out of your head and then it's on the page. And it's less your problem than it's everybody else's responsibility. That's the way I see it. Now, we've got a quick breakout session, because what I want you guys to do really quickly And it's only going to be 5 minutes because we've only got 10 more minutes left. So these are the questions that I'm going to be answering in your breakout session. And you guys need to do this yourselves. So you're going to give 5 minutes. And I want you to think about what policies you have in place already. What policies would you like to put in place? And who can you get to help you to put these policies in place? So I'm just going to do the breakout now, which means I'll have to stop sharing. 2 breakout rooms. I'm just going to open them all up. So you can just, I'm going to push you into your rooms and I'll come and visit you to check on you. Hi, everybody. Well, hopefully you found that 5 minutes useful just to get some thoughts together. I know some people have to leave, so they won't be coming back to the group, but that's fine because we're pretty much done for the day. What I did want to do was just really share my screen really quickly, just one more time. So I know that was really brief. It's really hard to go through policies really quickly. So thank you for coming on. If you've got any questions, please do call me. That's my project phone number, or email me. I am traveling a fair bit at the moment, so sometimes email might be best, but if you call me and leave a message, I will absolutely get back to you. If you've got any other questions, please do let me know. Otherwise, thanks so much for coming along today. We've got training on our website. We've got network meetings. We've got another one, not next week, but in 2 weeks. I'll be at Billawheeler next Tuesday doing a regional network meeting. So if you're anywhere near Billawheeler, please stop by at about 3:30 in the afternoon. We're doing a network meeting out there at the tuck shop in the school. So come and say hi to Tash and Beck as well. But otherwise, yeah, that was that one. That's about it. Do you have any questions before we go?
No, but thanks so much, Donna. That was super helpful.
No, that's all right. And I'm sorry it was so brief, but yes, any questions, call me anytime. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.